Have you heard about the heat wave in Oregon?
In Portland, Oregon, the temperature Sunday at 112.
Can't move around.
Devastating impact of our historic heat wave.
More than 100 deaths across the Pacific Northwest, including more than 60 in Oregon,
which reached a peak of 50 degrees Celsius. What about the historic forest fires in Siberia due to extreme drought? The Super Typhoon Rai, locally known as Odette. These weather events are extreme and concerning, and their magnitude was all caused by climate change.
climate
Change.
Why is this happening? How is it happening? Well, let's start from the basics.
The sun, as we know it, provides the Earth with sunlight and heat. Some of this light is reflected by the Earth's clouds and ice, thanks to the albedo effect, while the rest is stored and absorbed by the land and the waters. These are then re-emitted as heat. Some of this heat escapes into space, and the atmospheric greenhouse effect holds in some. These greenhouse gases' insulating effect is why there is life here on Earth. However, human activities have increased the concentration of these gases, one of which is carbon dioxide. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased by 40% since the Industrial Revolution, which started in 1790. Besides carbon dioxide, there are also other greenhouse gases that raise concern, like methane from farm animals and natural processing, and nitrous oxide from fertilizers. Since the 1970s, global temperature has increased.
Now, we've mentioned that the sun provides heat for the planet, and it's also essential to share that its output varies in history. If, let's say, the sun was the reason for this rise in temperature, the upper and lower layers of the atmosphere would be the most affected, but we see warming in the lower layers, or the layers where greenhouse gases are piling up. Also, since the 1970s, or the period where global temperature increased the fastest, temperature and solar activity moved in opposite directions. Also, if we run simulations using only natural causes of climate change, they predict no change in temperatures globally in the 20th century. But each of the past 3 decades has been warmer than any decade in history since we started measuring in 1850. Since the 1900s, average temperature around the world has increased a full degree. Most of it has happened since 1970. The past 30 years were the warmest in the 8 centuries. Therefore, scientists say that there is a 95% chance that human activity is the cause of this rise in temperature.
Since the 1870s, cement production, land use, and fossil fuel like oil and coal, which power our homes, factories, airplanes, and cars, have put 2,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. 30% of this stays up there today. Let's look at other pieces of evidence. Paleoclimatologists look at gases trapped in ice cores to see what the Earth's atmosphere was like in the past. And at more than 400 parts per million, today's carbon dioxide levels are the highest they've ever been for almost a million years.
You can also see this by looking at the evidence of what isotopes are in the different kinds of carbon that are in the atmosphere. Plant decay, which we can see in fossil fuels, has more carbon-12 isotopes than carbon-13. If more fossil fuels are burned, then the percentage of carbon-12 in the atmosphere should go up, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Some might say it could also be from volcanic activity, but that isn't the case because volcanoes only emit about a percentage as much CO2 as we do. Volcanoes make approximately 0.2 gigatons a year, while humans make approximately 35 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. What does this mean? Average temperatures around the globe are increasing way too fast. We are now warming 10 times faster than at the end of the Ice Age.
I don't see much change in the world. Where is this rise in carbon dioxide that you talk about? 70% of the Earth is covered by water. They absorb more than 90% of the heat that is added to the planet. The ocean is the biggest victim, and this is where we see the most extreme changes. Around the world, oceans are rising a tenth of an inch per year. They have been up 8 inches since 1901. Why is this? Firstly, water expands as it warms up, and you also have to consider the ice sheets and glaciers that melt in Greenland and Antarctica. This ice that is normally on land is sinking into the ocean. 400 billion tons of it since 1994.
The ocean is our biggest carbon sink, and as more carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere, more of it dissolves into the ocean, making our oceans acidic. That does not mean that our oceans will turn into acid, but that those animals with calcium cells won't be able to survive. Ocean surface acidification has increased 30% since the late 18th century. The pH of the ocean will hit 7.8 in 100 years if things continue the way they do. And if this happens, a third of the species in our oceans will go extinct. Summer sea ice in the Arctic has decreased by 40% since 1978. That might be the lowest in 1,400 years. Now, this is important because this ice usually reflects the sun's energy back into the atmosphere. However, since they melted, the ocean is soaking up the sun's light and heat.
CO2 emissions continue at their current rate. Earth is on its course to be 2.5 to 5 degrees warmer, and the ocean is to be a meter higher by the end of this century. The UN says if we were warm by 1.5 degrees before the end of the century, we'll be fine. They even say that 2 degrees probably be alright. But again, the problem is speed because right now, we're on track to hit 1.5 degrees in only 10 years. And if you don't slow down that warming, it could mean catastrophe within our lifetime. We're already feeling it. Getting hot in here. It isn't hard to find these signs. In the Philippines, we're already experiencing an increase in extreme weather events.
Let's take you to the Philippines now.
Officials in the Philippines say at least 5 people.
The headlines read natural disasters like floods, tornadoes, and deadly heat waves. Europe is colder than our Arctic. Food and water shortages are worsening. There are times where a year's worth of rain falls in a week. Millions are already losing their homes, and coastal cities are expected to go underwater within 80 years. Full island nations in the Pacific could disappear.
What are we doing to combat climate change? In the Philippines, we passed the Climate Change Act in 2009, requiring local governments to develop a local climate change action plan, or an LCCAP. However, only 160 out of the 1,700 LGUs had LCCAPs in place as of July 2016. The Climate Change Commission, or the principal policy-making organization on climate change issues, announced in April 2021 that as part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change, which we will go further into later on, it was revising its objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by the year 2030, up from a target of 70% set 4 years before. Neither current nor planned policies are sufficient to meet the Philippines' emissions targets. Increased energy use from transportation and buildings will be the primary source of emissions increase. According to current forecasts, greenhouse gas emissions will rise, which is incompatible with the Paris Agreement's targets.
Globally, there are voluntary agreements set, one of which is the Paris Agreement, which was adopted to strengthen the global response to the dangers of climate change by maintaining the global temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels within this century. Before the year 2100, as of July 2021, the Paris Agreement had 197 signatories, of which 191 parties, accounting for at least 55% of the global emissions, have ratified the agreement. There is also the Kyoto Protocol, which came into force on February 16, 2005. It established mandatory, enforceable targets for GHG emissions. Initial emissions reductions for participating countries range from -8% to +10% of 1990 levels, while the overall reduction goal was 5% below the 1990 level by 2012. When the first commitment period ended in 2012, the protocol was amended for a second commitment period. The new overall reduction goal is 18% below 1990 levels by 2020. If the world falls to reduce GHG emissions, climate change worsens. What should we expect in the future? What does this mean for our society?
The impacts mentioned earlier barely scratches the surface of the devastating effects climate change can do for a country like the Philippines. Climate change impacts are seen throughout every aspect of the world. Drought can harm food production and human health. Flooding can lead to disease spread and damages to ecosystems and infrastructure. Human health issues can increase mortality, impact food availability, and limit worker productivity. However, poorer nations in hotter regions carry the brunt of climate change. The Philippines, ranked third as the most vulnerable country to climate change, will most likely lose 6% of their GDP yearly until the year 2100 if the government disregards climate change risks.
Country will experience several threats to natural ecosystems as well. Coral loss. Based on the Low Carbon Report in 2016, experts predict that 98% of the coral reefs in the Southeast Asia will die by the year 2050. Global warming remains an issue. Many people depend on coral reefs for nutrition, fisheries, and tourist income, as well as coastal protection. Declining rice yields. According to the analysis of the International Rice Research Institute, grain yields will decrease by at least 10% for every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature. As a country who can't meet the demands of rice and need to import, this could mean hunger for a lot of people. More intense droughts. Global warming amplifies the impact of El Nino, which was felt by the country from 2015 to 2016. The Department of Agriculture estimated that 413,456 farmers have been directly affected by El Nino-associated drought and dry spells during the El Nino period.
Higher sea levels. The Philippines has observed a 60-centimeter sea level rise compared to the global average of about 19 centimeters. Thus, 60% of the LGUs are at risk, and the number of affected individuals is estimated to be 13.6 million Filipinos that would need relocation assistance.
Today, it faces a looming threat to its existence, along with the other surrounding cities. Based on satellite images and physical evidence, parts of the megacity are sinking continuously due to rising sea levels, while some of the communities around Manila Bay are already engulfed by water.
Water scarcity. The World Resources Institute conducted a study which revealed the Philippines will experience a substantial amount of water shortage by 2040 due to climate change. Labor productivity decline. Based on a study by the UN, work productivity will drop to 1% by 2025, 2% by 2015, and 4% by 2085 due to climate change-induced heat. More public health emergencies. Diseases such as dengue, malaria, and cholera may surge due to high degrees of temperature.
Climate change's effects on farmers can jeopardize food supply and security.
Bago magbunga yung palay, tamang-tamang dumating yung bagyo. Siyempre, nung lumalabas yung bunga niya, dumaan ang bagyo, hangin sa kaulan, kaya ganito ang nangyari. Tapos, umatake pa yung mga insekto.
As well as increasing global food price volatility. To continue in business, small farmers already fight to acquire a fair price for their products, protect themselves from weather and infestations, and contend with huge monocultural agricultural systems. Climate change is expected to exacerbate the situation for farmers by causing a shift in the climate and changes in production routines as a result of rising temperatures and more severe and shifting patterns of precipitation, all of which pose a threat to crops. Developing countries like the Philippines already face challenges such as a lack of infrastructure, as well as a lack of technical and financial resources, among several other issues that will limit their capacity to adapt. For example, expenditures that could have been utilized for education would instead have to be diverted to sea barriers, additional irrigation, or stormwater infrastructure. We've already gone over what the world and what we are currently doing in the country to combat climate change. That leaves us with...
What can we do? You can recycle and reuse things. Walk or take the bike. Turn off our electronics when they're not in use. Eat less meat. Eat more locally grown vegetables. And spread your knowledge and concern with others. It is if we start with this single act and hope that others follow suit that we might have a fighting chance to hand this world to the next generation and the next after that. Remember, it starts with you.